I'm going to begin by asking you the same first question I've been asking everyone in this series on waking up, which is, what does waking up mean to you? How would you define spiritual awakening from your own experience?
Well, it's a great first question to start with. When people ask me how do I define spirituality, I tend to answer by saying waking up. It's a very abridged version, but I like to try to keep it simple. So the waking up, though, I speak of it happens every day, and literally in every second of every day, which is something I had to learn over the course of years now, being on the spiritual path. When I first set out, I had the kind of naive view that spirituality and spiritual awakening was a process that happened when we would formally sit on a meditation cushion or in a yoga studio, visiting a sangha or a church, whatever appeals to people. But over the years, I've come to recognize it as it's a constant. It's a very fluid thing that's happening at all times. So practices like meditation or mantra and yoga, these are all wonderful things to do formally. But when we get up and leave them, instead of leaving them there, we bring it with us throughout our day. So it's with us all day, every day. I definitely wouldn't claim to be a fully awakened being by any means. I know there are some out there that are wonderful teachers, but for me, it's still an ongoing process. But that's part of the awakening, is being aware of that and being, at least for me, being real with myself about where I'm at in the process. As if I can really fully gauge that, but trying to be as real with myself as I can be. And the other component to that, and I'm just thinking of this now because I was just actually doing an online course with Andrew Harvey and another friend of mine, Adam Bucko, who co-authored Occupy Spirituality with Matthew Fox. We were talking about spiritual awakening and spiritual paths, and Andrew really hit home the point that in the process, to be careful of not being narcissistic about it. As we're going through the process, being of service to others in one way or another as we're doing that, and allowing something like karma yoga to be part of our awakening. So it's not just about us and our process, and are we there yet? Are we close yet? But, doing what we can do to help the process along, but also being available to others in whatever way works for us, but making ourselves available to others and being of service in the process. So that's a few thoughts that come to mind for that question.
Now, Chris, when you talk about waking up being something that happens in each moment or doesn't happen in each moment, what's an awake moment and a not awake moment in your life? How would you make the distinction?
Oh, well, sure. The awake moment for me, let's say, would be, when I wake up and I meditate and I'm there, though, of course, during the process of however long I'm meditating, most times I'm going to drift off in thought and then I come back. But those are more awake moments where I'm not lost in thought, where I'm actually present in the moment, aware of what's happening. Whether I'm skateboarding, I'm mindfully skateboarding, or maybe I'm not. Maybe I put on my iPod and I just kind of zone out to whatever music I want to listen to. But so that's the difference. The non-awake moments are where we're just kind of caught in thought as we're going about our day. I think about driving to work. It's very easy to get in your car and next thing you know, be getting out of your car at work and not even remember the drive. Or for me, a lot of the times, I do my best to start my day off mindfully, but I'll get, lost in thought, and next thing I know, I'll be getting out of the shower and 10 minutes have gone by, and it's like, oh, okay. But, that's part of the practice, is just being gentle with ourselves and cultivating a bit of compassion and recognizing it as a process and just doing our best to keep coming back to that awakened moment out of the not awake moment.
It seems that one of the themes running through the indie spiritualist is this idea of not accepting other people's truths, not taking on cultural norms, but really finding your own way. Tell me why that's been so important to you.
Well, that dates back to when I was a teenager, I think, and I was first introduced to punk rock music and hardcore music. And from that experience, a lot of the ethics involved in that are very much DIY or do it yourself. Question everything, find out what does and doesn't work for you. And I don't think that's totally different from a lot of what people were saying in the 60s and even a lot of spiritual teachers. So that's just, again, going back to I can only share what my experience has been. But that's been really important for me to share with others is to honor what really does work for you. Don't try to fit the mold of what someone else is doing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having people to look up to, but don't try to be that person. Take what you can and learn what you can from them, but honor what you're doing. Honor what really does resonate as true for you and feels right for you. And that is very important to me. I also honor that part of it in my experience was growing up in a very small town and being a skateboarder and a punk rocker where it was, football and sports were kind of the thing, soccer, baseball, and being a skateboarder, being into punk and hardcore and having piercings and things like that was definitely frowned upon. So it was a bit of a rough experience, but I'm grateful for that because even at that age, it taught me to dig a little bit deeper and really to not fold to what other people wanted me to be. I grew up playing sports and then I left them around 7th grade to learn to play guitar and drums and bass and, again, following the things I was passionate about. So with the addiction aspect taken out, I'm really grateful coming out and looking back on my life that I've had that, that I've had, just the will and the, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess just the heart and to follow my heart, the desire to really honor whatever was going on in my life as true without caving to peer pressure, cultural norms.
Chris, it was interesting to me that you said that enlightenment isn't something that you're particularly focused on, meaning, in the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how awakening can happen in each moment, each day, each moment, each day. And that's your focus is returning to that. But there's not some future goal that you're orienting towards. And I wonder if you can say more about that and how you do feel yourself orienting in your day. What are you orienting towards spiritually?
Well, spiritually, I feel like I'm orienting, again, not to sound cliche, but into the moment. Part of me, of course, I think that all of this practice, it leads to something deeper. That's why I do it. I certainly feel like I'm a much different person today than I was when I first set out on the path. And I see noticeable results for meditation. I'm generally a much more calm person, and it does help me to stay a bit more focused and be present in my day. But the reason that even matters to me is, so, I'm married and I have a wonderful daughter. And so I can be more present with them when I'm with them, instead of kind of being there and being lost in thought, which of course that happens too. But it allows me to offer more of myself to them more of the time. And not just them, but in everyday life. Being in recovery, it allows me to go in and speak in detoxes and rehabs and offer a bit of my experience and be there, mostly mindfully as I'm doing it, and then talking with people afterwards. And just, I feel like it allows me to offer more of myself in the moment and really be there with the other person. So that's what I try to orient towards throughout the day. Or I do my best to, at least. Again, far from perfect, and I get lost in thought and all the other good stuff everyone else does. But I just do my best to be there, keep coming back. I also find more of my experiences spent resting is what Ken Wilber might say is I amness or witnessing awareness, or not just Ken, but a number of teachers. Ram Dass talks about loving awareness, and to me that's another great practice I'll use. And actually, for example, I was at a Slayer concert a couple of years ago, and, I'm there and having a lot of fun, and I'm reciting the I am loving awareness mantra just because, I like to try to keep myself grounded. And, I ended up having this experience where, I was no longer saying the mantra. The mantra became kind of a cyclic thing happening, and then even that fell away. And it was one of those, peak experiences you'll hear various people talk about, where it was all just one, and it was a really beautiful experience. But I kind of laugh at that because that happened at a Slayer concert of all places. So, to be kind of more deeply rooted in that place of awareness, of presence, of loving awareness, that if there's a goal, I guess that's the orientated goal that I would strive for on a daily basis.
Chris, this series is partially a celebration of Sounds True's 30th anniversary, which is taking place in 2015. And I'm curious, here you are, you're in your 30s, and, Sounds True's been at this for a long time. Many of the people that I'm interviewing as part of this Waking Up series are teachers in their 60s and 70s. And I'm curious, as we could say a next generation spiritual teacher, if you think that spiritual awakening might be viewed differently or held differently in this next generation. People might want to talk about it differently. Tell me what your sense is of that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good point, and I feel like it actually could be a very accurate statement. Obviously, times are changing, things are different, people are different. On a personal level, the thing I find interesting for myself is I tend to resonate more with the teachings of the people in their 60s and 70s, and I find those are the books that I keep coming back to. I think maybe just because that's what really got me going on my path, but the teachers like Ram Dass and just the people that came before me are very important to me. But as we move forward, I think again, I already mentioned, but people like Sarah Beek and Brad Warner, Noah Levine, I think that teachers like that are able to resonate possibly a bit more, not with all spiritual aspirants, for lack of a better word, but I think a lot of them. I think today we're in a bit, for lack of a better word, a more raw kind of place. I think a lot of people are looking for a very direct connection, not to say that people before us weren't, but I feel like that is really what a lot of people are looking for with spirituality today. And I think it is being offered by a lot of these younger teachers in the way they present their material. And it is about that direct connection. And whether it is through Buddhism or Christianity or whatever the case may be, again, that's just what I've seen of it. Who knows? I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I feel like, I just keep coming back to this, but the most important thing I can do personally is just be as absolutely real as I can about where I've been and what I'm offering people. And I find so far that resonates. And I think also allowing people to see where we fall and that brokenness and being very real about that. That's something that's important for me to offer people as well. Because I think a lot of people, sometimes spirituality can be misrepresented as something that is just this really beautiful love and light experience, and that is certainly part of it. But there's also the shadow and there's the darkness, and I think that at least in very popular spirituality, that is often overlooked or kind of swept under the rug a bit, because that kind of stuff doesn't always sell. Of course, you have the teachers like Pema that does quite well, but I think that's a very important part of it, and I think that that's becoming more of an important issue for people newer to spirituality, younger generation spiritual people. And again, not to say that the other generation of teachers weren't talking about that, but I feel like it's becoming a bit more of a focus, and I think that's great. I think it's very important.
Yeah, and to talk about specifically the shadow, the darkness in this context of spiritual awakening, what would you say from your experience are some of the myths about spiritual awakening, meaning, what it does and doesn't deliver, or hasn't delivered in your own life, versus what maybe you thought spiritual awakening would be like?
Yeah. I mean, I was super naive when I first got on the path, I was the person who really thought it was going to be this beautiful experience. It was going to fix all of my problems. I would start meditating and life would be amazing. And it has had a tremendous impact and certainly helped. But meditation, for example, what I found out very quickly was that, at least in my case, it brings up a lot of stuff, that's deep down in there. So I've had, and I still to this day will occasionally have meditations where a lot of just the darkness from my past and the way I used to live will come up. And it's not comfortable and it's not fun to sit with, but that's the kind of work that I feel needs to be done, at least in my life, to really continue progressing, to continue healing, to continue, I guess, spiritually awakening. But that was a big one for me. And then a few years into it, reading Chogyam Trungpa's Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, that's a book I try to revisit frequently because it really it helps put me back in my place. There are times where I'll think, wow, yeah, you're doing great, and you're making so such and such progress on the path, and then I read that book and it's like, yep, I'm getting caught here, and it's good I feel to keep myself in check. So I feel like, a lot of it can be presented as very shiny and pretty, and it's hard for me to talk about that I really don't want to sound like a judgmental kind of person or just a jerk. But that doesn't resonate for me. I feel like a lot of it is, again, watered down, offered in a very fluffy way. But I do recognize and honor that helps some people get their foot in the door, and that's what some people need. And that's fine. I just feel like, though, if that's all that's being offered, then, how far are you really going to go? How far is the healing really going to, or how deep is the healing really going to be? I don't know. Again, just my experience with it.
And how would you say it's different now when you relate to painful experiences when they come up? Or is it different, let's say, than, when you were earlier on the path? Because I get what you're saying about sitting and meditating and having lots of difficult, whether it's memories or body sensations or just uncomfortableness come up. But how do you relate to it now?
Well, as I was actually working on Everything Mind, I was writing a little bit about how when I first started with meditation, probably the first year or so, I would very unskillfully, and I didn't really recognize at the time, but I would use various mantras or breathing techniques as a form of aversion when those things came up, because I just wasn't ready to sit with them. So when they started to come up, and again, I'm under the impression of, spirituality is going to fix everything, but wait a minute, here are these painful things happening. So I would quickly go to, a particular mantra or whatever breathing technique to try to push it away. And it worked, but all I was doing was suppressing it. Whereas today, I recognize that's all I'm doing if I'm working with mantras or various breathing techniques or whatever in those ways. I'm just suppressing these things that need to come out. They need to, at least again, in my experience, they need to be acknowledged and recognized and walked through in order to, remove the heart armor. I don't mean to say that again, but that's the best way I can really think of it. I love when Pema talks about that. We mindfully tend to these things and we touch the soft place of our heart. And that allows us to, to sit with them and be with them. There's a beautiful practice that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about where he talks about holding these very painful thoughts and memories and emotions in the same way a mother would hold a newborn baby, wrapping it in a newborn blanket and holding it close to our chest. And that's something that I've worked with and I've kind of expanded on myself, but that's been a very profound thing for me. So, today I'm actually able to, when these things come up, to look at them and be with them and allow them to be there and allow them to, have a little tantrum if they need to and do whatever they need to do, but to sit there and honor that and open my heart to it rather than, keep a closed heart and keep that armor there and push it away. And that's made a world of difference for me, not just spiritually, but especially in my life in recovery, because those were the things I wasn't willing to do. And those were the things that were keeping me very sick. And I could only suppress it so long before it just became overwhelming. And inevitably, in my case, I would return to drugs and alcohol, where some other people might, use things like food or television, shopping, whatever the case may be, but some form of aversion. So that's the difference for me today.
Chris, in having this conversation with you, what I really feel is your tenderheartedness, your open-heartedness, your sweetheart. And what I'd love to know is if you were to describe this process in your life of removing the armor of the heart, how does that go for you? Like, you find some place where you're shut down. How do you keep peeling away these layers of armoring around the heart?
Well, one of the biggest things I had to really work on was cultivating compassion for myself in the process. That was huge for me. I lived for so many years of my life where I couldn't have a mirror in my apartment because I couldn't even stand to look at myself. Or if I was walking into a mall and they had glass doors, let's say, and I noticed that I would be able to see my reflection, I would have to look down at the floor. Or if I was walking by a painting on a wall that was, in a frame, a glass frame, I would look the other way just so I wouldn't even get a glimpse of myself. That was how deep I was in just this place of self-loathing. So cultivating compassion for myself in this process has been huge. Working with a loving kindness practice has been a very, very big one for me. Something that really hit home for me. I was interviewing Jai Uttal. We both performed at the Yoga Journal conference in Estes Park a few years ago, and I was doing an interview with him the day after he performed, and he said, he's like, I did something last night that it's only the second time I've done it, and he shared very candidly with me about how he still deals, with these self-love issues, and that was important for me to hear, and that's why I try to be very candid about my issues as well. But so he was sharing about how the night before when he's performing, he takes an opportunity to introduce all the members of the band to the audience. And he introduces them and says thank you, and he always skips over himself. But what he had done that night was very quietly, kind of down into his chest, so you couldn't really hear it in the microphone, was say, and thanks, Jai. And for them, that was a huge thing. And that really resonated with me because, yeah, I got that. I completely get that. I understand how difficult it can be to remove the armor and peel it away. But it's simple acts like that. Or for me, I had read a while ago, I love Bernie Glassman in his book with Jeff Bridges, the dude Zen master. He talks about a very simple, what he calls Zen practices in the morning. When you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, and then just look at yourself in the mirror and laugh for a second. Just laugh at the silliness of the whole situation. It's, and sometimes we can't do that. I know there's times I can't, but when we can, little things like that help. So for me, it's just constantly coming back to meditation, so I can really be with the pain that needs to be dealt with. And I'm not saying I'm always sitting in a place of woe is me or, I'm suffering, because that's not the case at all. I find that tending to these wounds and this pain, it frees it, and it frees up a lot of that stored, pent-up negative energy, and it just allows me to love myself more, love others more. It's certainly a work in progress, but I have found no other work that is anywhere near as important as this in my life. So that's what it looks like for me today.
Okay, Chris, I just have one final question for you. In the beginning of your book, The Indie Spiritualist, you focus on the word hope, and that this is a word that you actually have tattooed on your body. And I'd be curious to know, hope for what? What does hope mean to you? Why should I hope? Hope for what?
I was actually giving a talk a few months ago, and someone was reading Pema's work, and they were like, well, she says abandon hope. And I was like, yeah, I know she does. And I completely understand what she's saying, and I get it, and I honor it, and I wouldn't say she's wrong by any means. But so hope for me is a big one. And I think for a lot of people, especially in recovery, or those who, and not just recovery from drugs or alcohol, but I mean people that have dealt with heavy depression, anxiety, cutting, things of that nature, hope goes a really, really long way for them. In my own case, I share this story in Indie Spirituals where it was actually during my first relapse back in, I think, 2005. I was in Rome visiting a friend, and it was about 2 a.m., and I was on a bus. I remember sitting there with one of those big Foster's cans of beer, and there was this old man. He had to have been in his 80s, kind of just staring at me, and I didn't think much of it. But after a couple of minutes, he points to my knuckles, and he says, in his very broken Italian accent, he says, "Hope, it's the last to die." And I was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. I didn't think much of it. But it became a very important thing for me. Each time I relapsed after that, and there were a number of them, the one thing that would come back to me was that man's voice saying those words, as if he had just said them to me that very morning. I could hear them crystal clear, and just the thought of hope, it's the last to die. So being in this place of utter brokenness and despair, but holding on to the thought of hope that I can get through this and it can get better, that has been a very, very, very important thing for me. And it's a really important sentiment, I believe, for a lot of people in recovery. I know, and I think Eckhart talks about, hope is you're putting things off into the future. Let's be in the present moment. And I completely honor that, and I understand what they're saying. But I think for a lot of people, when they're in that very, very broken place, and if they haven't had much, if any, time on the spiritual path, abandoning hope is not the right thing for them in that moment. So that's why it's been very important to me. And I think it can be a very powerful sentiment for people to hold on to and hopefully help them through some difficult times.